So while we're out here on the range, I thought I'd talk a little bit just about safety, both firearm safety in general and then just range safety as well. So typical firearm, I've got 2 rules. NRA has 4. I'll explain why my 2 rules kind of summarize all 4 of theirs. But first and foremost, muzzle in a safe direction. Now, the targets, the berm down there is what I consider a safe direction. Down at the ground, as long as you're not shooting at your own feet or somebody else's feet, as long as it's going to stop when it hits the ground, can be a safe direction. But ideally, you don't want it to impact next to the ground. It's going to throw a whole bunch of dirt, debris right into you. So I like to use the back of the berm as a safe direction. Now I might point down at a 45. I'm shooting from a low ready or something like that. But ideally, I kind of treat the berm as my safe direction. Now, one of the things that people will say is be sure of what's between you and your target and what's beyond your target. Well, the only way that you know that that's a safe direction is if you know what's between you and your target, what's beyond your target. So when I look down there, I see steel targets and I see a dirt berm. Okay, I know that between me and where that bullet is going to stop is safe. Now you say, well, what if you shoot over the berm? Okay, now if I'm a really bad shot and I end up sending one way high, we're in the middle of the New Mexico desert, so there is actually nothing there. There's a mountain in the background that I can see. It's probably at the far range of a .22 long rifle. So if I ended up shooting, I know that there's nobody over there. Okay? It's probably going to splash down somewhere between this berm and that mountain, but there's nothing back there. That's what I consider a safe direction. Now that's an ideal scenario. At an indoor range, obviously you've got a bulletproof backstop, but there might be people on the other side of that backstop. So it's not necessarily a safe direction if you consider the fact that there are people behind your target, but the fact that that bullet is going to stop kind of makes it a safe direction. So that's rule number 1 for me, muzzle in a safe direction. That way if anything goes wrong, if I accidentally squeeze this trigger, gun goes off, anything happens, I know that bullet is going someplace safe. Rule number 2, finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. That one goes without saying. Modern guns have gotten so good in their design that I could toss this thing on the ground loaded, it's not going to go off. I could bang on it with a hammer, not likely to go off. Okay? It's a very safe firearm unless you decide to make it shoot. So you squeeze that trigger, this gun is designed to send a piece of lead that way when you squeeze the trigger. That's what it's designed to do. So if you don't want it to fire, keep your finger off the trigger. When you do want it to fire, then you go ahead and place that finger on the trigger. Those 2 rules are my 2 rules. Finger off the trigger, muzzle in a safe direction. And in saying that, realize this is all the time, which covers the other rule of the 4 rules that are very popular. Always treat a gun like it's loaded. If you're keeping the muzzle in a safe direction, keeping your finger off the trigger, you're treating it like a loaded gun. So those are the 2 rules I teach people just to keep things nice and simple. Finger off the trigger, muzzle in a safe direction. Those other 2 rules, be sure of what's between you and the target and beyond the target. Equally important, but I think that's wrapped up in make sure you're pointing in a safe direction. And as always, it is a dangerous tool. Okay? Now all the guns that I own, I don't call them weapons because they're not intended to harm people. I call them tools, and for me they're really just sporting equipment. Okay? For me this is a sport. I'm not trying to shoot people, I'm not trying to kill people, I'm not trying to wound anybody. This is all about fun for me. Okay? So treat it like it's loaded because it is dangerous. Just like I don't leave my nail gun or my drill drivers where my kids can get access to it, I treat this gun as a very delicate tool that is also very dangerous. So those are my rules for safety as far as the firearm is concerned. Keep it pointed in a safe direction. Keep the finger off of the trigger. All right. Okay, so let's just talk about range safety real quick. So obviously we're here at a nice outdoor range. I kind of have the place to myself right now, which is awesome. But if there's other people shooting here, I want to be courteous of them as well. If you have to go downrange to hang targets, or if they have to go downrange to hang targets, declare a cold range. Go and talk to everybody on the line and say, hey, do you mind if we go cold for a moment? Everybody will say, yeah, we can go cold. Everybody places their unloaded firearms down on the table, much like I have my firearms on the table right now. No magazines in the gun, no ammo. If it's convenient, keep the bolt open, keep the slide open so that people can visually see that those guns are empty, and then everybody can walk down, change targets, add targets, remove targets as needed, but nobody touches guns while there's anybody down there. It's one of the most nerve-wracking experiences to turn around on the 100-yard line of a rifle range and look back and see somebody sitting at a bench scoping in their 30-06 right on your torso. You're really hoping that he's just messing with his scope and he doesn't actually have a live round in the chamber, but it's just not courteous to do that. And it's not safe. He might think that he has an unloaded gun and he goes ahead and he just squeezes the trigger, just a dry press, and he just happens to be crosshaired on your chest. Sorry, 30-06 is going to do a lot of damage. Don't touch your guns when somebody's downrange. Now when you're shooting steel like we've been shooting today, 12 yards is kind of considered the minimum safe distance. Some people say 10 yards, some people say 15, but realize that everything that you send downrange at that steel is going to splash. And the likelihood that some of that splash is going to come back at you is very high, but it's coming back at an angle. So the further away you are, the more likely that it's going to go to either side of you rather than straight back at you. If you're observing somebody shooting steel, the safest place for you is to actually stand right behind them, looking over their shoulder at their firearm. That way their body is acting as a shield for most of the stuff coming back, and again, that angle is going to disperse stuff out to the sides of you guys. So try not to shoot steel close up. Some people do it. I wouldn't recommend it. You get a lot of splash coming off that, and catching a copper jacket in the face is pretty terrible. It's not fun. I've had little pieces come back at me, nothing huge, but it's not too fun. When shooting steel, again, be courteous to the other shooters around you. Realize because of that splash, because of that angle, it's possible that your splash is actually going to hit the guy on the line next to you. So if possible, let him take his shots, let him back away from the line either to go reload or put his gun away, then you take your shots and you kind of alternate, much like bowling. You know, you don't want to bowl right next to the guy on the lane next to you. Give each other some space, give each other some room. Loading and unloading your firearms in and out of a box, okay? Make sure that they are unloaded. If you can do it on the line, do it on the line. Go ahead, do a chamber check. Make sure there's nothing in there. Do a magazine check. I'll demonstrate that real quick, okay? So this is an unloaded gun, but I'm going to keep it pointed downrange anyway, and I've got a berm all the way around here, so if I point it over here, it's still a safe direction, okay? So I'm going to keep this pointed downrange. I'm going to do a quick little chamber check and say, nope, there's nothing in there. All right, that's an empty magazine. Don't put a magazine back in your gun. Okay? If you store your gun with an empty magazine in it, there's a very high risk that someday you're accidentally going to put a loaded magazine in there, and you're going to say, yeah, it's got my empty in it. And then you're going to say, yeah, I could rack the slide real quick, and oh, that's interesting. It didn't lock back on the empty slide, so you pop it back, you say, no, it's an empty magazine. If it had one round in it, looks like an empty magazine, you've got a round in your chamber right now. Okay? That's just going to breed disaster. So ideally, leave your magazines out of your guns when you're boxing them up. No, it's not going to be the end of the world if you put an empty magazine in there and leave it there. It's just a matter of keeping yourself, other people safe. So now that I know that my gun is empty, I've done my chamber check, I've done my magazine check, I'm going to go ahead and close my slide. If I have a safety or a decocker, I'm going to use that to put it in as safe a condition as I can. And then I'm not going to just spin around with my gun and go to my box. I'm going to point it down at the ground like this, and I'm going to hold it like this. Now, why in the world am I doing all of this silly stuff if I've got to transport it from the line back to my box? Well, this ensures that it's going down to the ground if it goes off, for whatever reason, even though it's unloaded. It also keeps all of your fellow range patrons from freaking out when you muzzle them with your loaded gun. You keep this nice and close to you, pointed down, nobody's freaking out that you're pointing a gun at them. Okay? The other thing it says is my finger is off the trigger. This gun's not going to go off. I'm not a threat. Okay? So when I'm coming from the line, I'm going to go ahead, grab it like this, take it over to my box, and then as much as I can, I want to keep that muzzle pointed away from people. Again, it's an unloaded gun, but we don't want people freaking out about us pointing a gun at them or muzzling them. So we're going to go ahead and take it. We're going to go ahead and set it right down in our box, leave it there. Okay? If at any time you have to leave the gun, either close the case so that nobody sees that the gun is there, or keep that action open so that they can visually inspect without touching your gun, hey, it is in fact empty. I don't have to worry about the fact that the gun is laying there. Okay? So box up your firearms, put your ammo in its box, and if you live in a state where you have to keep those two separate for transportation, keep them separate. Otherwise, try and keep your ammo away from where your guns are, just so that somebody doesn't accidentally put a loaded magazine into your gun when you don't know. All right, I think that's it for range safety. Anyway, stay safe, enjoy the range. I'm just a guy having fun at the range.